Hey guys, Average Picker here. So, I thought what I would do is some videos on troubleshooting challenge locks. This is going to be the first one. I don't know necessarily how many we're going to have, but as I run into some issues, I'm going to try to document them and what the potential problems and the fixes were. And so this one we're going to look at essentially what happens when you're making a challenge lock and you think you've got it all right, and then you come to learn the key will not go in or the key will not come out. So let's take a look at that. So let's establish kind of a clear idea here of what we are talking about here. So you've made your pins and you've got them in there. When you put your key in and you drop all your pins in, all your key pins in, you see they're lined up, they're flush to the shear line. That's all good. It'll go in and out all right. Probably even turns okay. You take your key out, you do your final lock assembly, you twist it, get that satisfying click that all the pins have gone down. You take your key, and now suddenly your key won't go in all the way, right? Or what you've done is, again, all the pins are on the shear line, you've got your key in there, it all checks out, you're looking good, you put all your drivers in place. You load it up with the key, you turn it into what should be the locked position, and you can't get the key out. The key is stuck. And just to be further clear, you've got your key in there, your pins are all to the shear line and good. You do your final assembly and load it. It turns, no problem, but the key's not coming out, right? So that's what we're kind of looking at here. Well, the easiest thing that can cause this problem, and the first thing you should probably check, is your key pin. Because we know the key pin, it has that little bevel. Some of them are a little more pronounced than others, but it has all, your key pins have a bevel on it to help it ride up and down on those keys. And you may have just flipped one. So when you were doing your assembly, you may have put it in like that. And because it's now hitting on the flat of, hitting on the flat of the key pin, it's simply not riding up and down on the key as it gets inserted. And now it could even be fine when it's not under any kind of tension. So if you just have that key pin in there, even if it's reversed, the key still may go in and out just fine. Maybe a little snaggy, but you don't have any of the spring tension pushing down on it. So that's the first thing, and probably the easiest thing to check. Okay, now the next thing, and this is kind of unique because of how we make challenge locks. When we make challenge locks, we just tend to use pins. We will grab pins from drivers, we will grab pins from key pins, whatever, and we shape them, and then we load them up. And sometimes, even though the key will load and everything fine, really what the problem you're running into is you simply don't have enough room in the chamber. Now what I mean is, this is actually a key pin, and I actually had an issue with. I had a different problem with this one, but it simulates the problem still well enough. And this was just, the whole point of this pin was just to make a really smooth pin that was going to hopefully pluck back into the shear line. So I'm just going to load it up here and show you what's going on with it. Or I'm not going to load it up here. Let's see. It's a very smooth pin. Okay, so we've got the pin loaded up. And there's not really any issue there. But now if we go and examine the broader problem, there's actually not enough room in this chamber to accommodate. I am just dropping everything. Okay, as I was saying, there's actually just not enough room in the whole chamber to accommodate the pin, a spring, and the key pin. So in other words, the chamber is just not big enough for the driver, the spring, and the key pin. Now this may be a little anti-intuitive to you because this, like I said, our key could go in and everything could work and turn quite smoothly when we're doing the assembly. And in fact, the combination may be able to sit here without any trouble at all. The problem is, remember, that pin has to make that entire journey to get to that location. And when it starts climbing up here, it's doing exactly what you're seeing. And I grabbed this lock intentionally because it's got some very small driver chambers in it. There's just nowhere else for that to go. It will not go in any further. So it'd be entirely possible to load up all my key pins, put the key through the core, get it all slid in, but then that pin simply cannot ride up there. There's just not enough room. So the key will just simply not come out. Now, like I said, this is an actual pin that gave me some trouble, and it is just really a very finely polished pin. It's a slightly reduced diameter, and I had it paired up with another one that was very similar. It was a very smooth pin, slightly reduced diameter. So this was going to be the driver, and there was another one that was much smaller, and it was going to be the key pin. But it was a very similar concept. It was just a very smooth pin. And it all locked up. Now, I knew it fit in everything in the chambers because I had tested for that easy stuff first. And I didn't think the diameter reduction was really an issue. I mean, we've made T-pins and things, and we've certainly all probably made challenge lock pins with a far more reduced diameter than that. And I may go into more detail and do another video on this later. I think it's easy. We think of the binding occurring at our shear line with the pins. But any point that there's friction within the lock is going to create kind of a binding mechanic. And now, especially if we have reduced the diameter on these pins, they have a little bit of wiggle room. Now this core is actually a very tiny one. And so this pin is a tight fit in here. But even so, there is still a little bit of play across there, you can see. And if we think of something more like what it was intended for, which is this LSDA, it had a little bit more wiggle room. And if you think about what's happening, let's get a proper key pin here for this. When your key goes in, you're actually tilting that pin a little bit. Not very much, but just a little bit, especially when we do these challenge lock builds, because we are doing so much cutting and things and we're affecting these pins. That same effect that gives you that deep false set is in play with the pins the whole way around the lock in all of its kind of axes, I guess, all of its dimensions. So that pin is getting tilted as it has to ride up and down that, because your pressure is coming in this way. The pin kind of exaggeratingly here, but the pin cocks that direction. And so this is an exaggeration of what was happening. Obviously my pins were not this reduced. But when the key came in, it was causing that to push, and because the pins were so polished, they were binding up kind of together on the shear line, because it was getting kind of cockeyed. But it was also putting an incredible amount of pressure on these points within the lock, right? So we had friction occurring there in the center, at the shear line where we would kind of expect as the lock is being turned. I'm drawing a dick and balls here, if you didn't notice this. But we also had contact points causing friction there as well as there. And yeah, this is now the crudest bathroom graffiti that is probably most popular all over the entire world. But yeah, so that's what we had. We basically had these friction points forming. I'll use X's on this one. We will attempt to keep the vulgarity down. On 3 points. And that friction was enough that the pins were not sliding up anywhere. Now, what becomes interesting with this case and even the last case is that the lock is still perfectly pickable. So yeah, the lock is perfectly pickable, as I was saying. And if you think about it, the reason that the key wouldn't work, but the lock could still be pickable, is when you're going in there and picking, you're skipping that whole process of the key sliding in, and you're able to get a good, just straight lift on the pins. So when the key itself would slide in, it would tip that pin a little bit, but that wasn't an issue you would necessarily run into with the pick. You could go in there and you could just do a nice, get a good level thing on it, get a nice good straight pick going, and just lift that pin straight up without causing those additional friction points to hit on the sides of the chambers. So yeah, there we go. Things to look for if your key, after you've put together your great challenge lock, does not work. Check to make sure you don't have any of the key pins flipped, and check to make sure the pins are actually capable of riding up and down the length of the portion of the key that they need to, because obviously all the pins aren't going to have to go up and down all of this. Right. Sorry about that weird cat situation. But yeah, because your pins back here in the back chambers are not going to have to make the whole thing. You know what I mean? Because of the way the key goes in. So yeah, that's just a couple things to check for. And of course the other one, is have you just reduced the diameters in such a way that the pins are now forcing into each other. Okay guys, that's just a little quickie for the challenge lock kind of build videos I've been trying to do some more of. And as I run into more issues putting these guys together, yeah, we will probably do more of these videos. All right, you guys have a good one.